Exactly, you're completely right. So, in any case, let us begin with our honored guest, Zdravko Kobek, who I will just very shortly introduce. Zdravko Kobek is an associate professor for classical German philosophy at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. He has published 4 books on Kant's theoretical and practical philosophy and numerous articles, especially on Kant, Hegel, and contemporary philosophy. I would add, especially on Foucault. Recently, his main area of research is increasingly centered on Hegel's logic and political philosophy, and he's also the Slovenian translator of classical philosophical texts such as Kant's Critique of Pure Reason or Hegel's Elements of Philosophy of Right and Science of Logic. Today, we will talk about the transformation of public knowledge, some Hegelian remarks in Honneth's mode. Zdravko, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Ja ću prvo probati reći nešto na srpskom. Malo mi se, moram reći da mi je malo neugodno, malo strano. Zapravo mislim da smo ovdje svi oni koji ponajbolje čak razumijemo ovaj jezik, tako da je... Well, they will excuse a short notice, yes. Želim samo da se zahvalim na srpskom na poziv, ljubazni poziv od Adriane i Petra i ovog predivnog instituta. Želio bih reći nešto što sam prvi put primetio u jednom filmu, ne znam da li ga poznajete, Invazion Barbar, gdje je jedan kanadski režiser. Historija je bila u tome kako se suprotno sa onom što se obično misli, mišljenje je kolektivni fenomen. A poslije sam, čitajući knjigu od Franka Fischbacha, Qu'est-ce que c'est qu'un gouvernement socialiste, koji je zapravo kritika Honnetha, ali dobro, to je nešto drugo, tada sam vidio da je to zapravo ideja od Johna Deweyja, koji kaže baš to da je mišljenje nije neka osamljena radnja koju čovjek radi sa sebe. Može to biti, ali ako jeste, onda je još uvijek kolektivni fenomen. Ne može da se misli sam. Uvijek se misli negdje, u nekoj sredini. I imam osjećaj da je ova sredina dobra za mišljenje. To sam htio reći, tako da se pridružujem one što je rekla prorektorica, što je zapravo bi bio divan poklon. Ima ih puni koji žele, ali ne, mi to nećemo jer imamo ovo. Dobro. Hvala. A sad mogu da idemo na engleski. I will now, this was a short introduction among, let's say, for the inner circle. Sorry. And now I'm going to say something on transformation of public knowledge, some Hegelian remarks in Honneth's mode. Now, as I see it, Axel Honneth's work can be understood as an attempt at a rectalization of Hegel's political philosophy. This is apparent not only in Honneth's Leiden an Unbestimmtheit, the book that was subtitled An Attempt at a Rectalization of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. It also applies to Das Recht der Freiheit, which was written as a normative reconstruction of modern ethical life according to the structure of Hegel's philosophy of right. It's enough to see the content of the book to see that it's a rectalization, a new system, a new philosophy of right for our days. And it further extends to Honneth's entire project, I think, which relied on Hegel's Jena manuscripts to appropriate the topic of recognition. In a sense, it even applies to Honneth's latest book, the Idee des Sozialismus, in which he reaches back to Hegel in order to recover Marx, I think. And since I say this as a Hegelian, as I am, it should be considered a distinct praise of Honneth's work. And in order to take this tribute even further, I will try to repeat his gesture, Honneth's gesture. That is, I will try to contribute to the reactualization of Hegel's political philosophy. In my view, Hegel is incredibly modern author. If one reads his political philosophy today, for example, his assertions on the relationship between civil society and the state, on the universal estate, on the rebel, for instance, both poor and rich, on political representation, and also in relation to abstract work or social resources and participation in them, one can, I believe, only admire the conceptual sharpness which enabled him to perceive phenomena that at his time, at Hegel's time, were actually still in the making. One must admit, however, that sometimes Hegel could also be wrong. One such case, difficult to explain, a very interesting case, is the issue of women's equality. How come that Hegel holds the position on women, which I believe you all know, that he did? It's a very interesting question. Similarly, Hegel did not notice that within the system of needs a particular structure was in the making, that in addition to the universality of civil society, universality of Verstand, let us say, and the universality of the state, universality of Vernunft, tended to produce a third universality, which is neither, universality of capital, blocking the necessary transition from civil society to the political state. So on this point, we had to wait for Marx, I think. But if of the two, Hegel was nevertheless the more precise thinker of modernity, at least in my opinion, one must finally admit that in some respects, historical development refused to follow his guidelines. Liberal democracy, as it exists today in developed countries, evidently does not correspond to the Hegelian concept of the modern state, both in terms of self-image, of self-understanding, and its reality. Hegel would be genuinely surprised, I believe, that in the modern world the state is gradually losing its political power, and that the most important decisions are increasingly made outside the political framework. For example, in courts that act as political decision makers, or semi-private forums with no political legitimacy, for instance, some commissions in the EU. Such discrepancies are not mere empirical facts, in the sense that if the facts do not coincide with the theory, so much the worse for the facts, which is, by the way, not the Hegelian position. If anyone, it was Hegel who recognized the conceptual relevance of the positive, and who would consider actual historical development as a serious challenge to his conception of the state. Hegel would certainly ask what went, in a sense, wrong for there to be such a wide gap between his concept of the state and the actually existing state, the state that we are living in. Or rather, Hegel would ask, what is today? And in an attempt at a reconciliation, or as Honneth calls it, normative reconstruction, I think there is a conceptual similarity, he would then seek to bring out that which therein, in what it is today, is already pointing beyond. In my contribution, I will try to take a few steps in this direction. First, I will briefly describe Hegel's conception of the modern state, especially in relation to knowledge. Then I will try to sketch out the differences that have recently prevailed in the regime of knowledge. And finally, I will try to indicate what political implication this altered structure of the universal might have today. Hegel's concept of the state in its relation to the knowledge. Hegel uses the concept of the state in a flexible and expanded sense of the word that goes obviously well beyond the official institutions of a territorially enclosed community, which would be the narrow concept of the state. If Hegel describes civil society as an external state, as the state of necessity and of the understanding, then obviously there is also an internal state, a state of freedom and of the reason. And if he speaks, as he does, of the political state proper, then there must be some dimension of the state that goes beyond the realm of politics in the common sense of the word. To emphasize this diffusion of the state in the social tissue, Hegel uses the intently ambiguous term Verfassung, which, similar to constitution in English, refers both to the fundamental law of the state and the actual composition of the body social. It could be said that Hegel conceived of the state against the background of his theory of ethical life, Sittlichkeit, as a particular manifestation of the ethical substance. This is probably the state. The state does not dissolve totally into substance, however. The state is, to be more precise, the place where the universal ethical substance becomes conscious of itself. Moreover, at least in the case of the modern state, and in Hegel's view, only the modern state conforms to the concept of the state, this self-conscious unity is established in the regime of knowledge, as thinking universal. Hegel observes, I quote, the state is the ethical spirit as knowing itself. And he further says the following: the state is the actuality of the ethical idea, the ethical spirit as substantial will, manifest and clear to itself, which thinks and knows itself, and implements what it knows, and insofar as it knows it. So, for Hegel, the state thinks. The state thinks, the state knows. And far from being a sign of an absurd glorification of the state, the above thesis merely summarizes the widespread conviction of modern times that state is obliged, in spite of its sovereignty, or rather precisely because of it, to justify its actions within the universal space of reason. I quote from the lectures, "Whatever is to achieve recognition today no longer achieves it by force, and only to small extent through habit and custom, but it achieves it through insight and reasons." End quote. If the state of old was allowed to act arbitrarily, if it could cite the raison d'état, as it was called then, to ward off any further scrutiny, the modern state is in principle l'état de raison, the state of reason. It has to determine all its measures rationally, according to prescribed procedures, and seek their approval with its citizens, as Hegel says, in their consciousness. In this sense, the modern state is an institution of knowledge, I would say, or as Klaus Viehweg aptly put it, an epistocracy. This is his term of the Hegelian concept of the modern state. The close relationship between knowledge and state can be illustrated by the place Hegel allotted to religion. It used to be assumed once that the state was obliged to honor basic religious teachings, or at least that it must not act against them. Against such claims, Hegel counters that, I quote, "the state too has its doctrine, namely that," end quote, "namely that which is laid down in its regulation and then in scientific discoveries. The state is an institution of knowledge not only in the sense that it must justify itself in the space of rational knowledge, but also insofar as scientific knowledge has its institutional support precisely in the state. Where else?" I quote again from the lectures. An essential part of the fully developed state is consciousness, or thought. The state accordingly knows what it wills, and knows this as an object of thought, as Gedachtes. Since then, the seat of the knowledge is within the state. Science also has its seat here. The science has its seat in the state. True, in the Encyclopedia, Hegel remarks that the entire sphere of the absolute spirit could be called religion in general. But if religion is indeed, as Hegel says, the consciousness that the absolute has of itself, this should lead us to conclude that it is the opposite, that it is rather science that constitutes the true religious form of the modern spirit. And if, according to Hegel, in the development of the absolute spirit, art was replaced by religion, then we should again come to the conclusion that in the modern world, it is science that has become the privileged form of the spirit's self-knowing. In this sense, similar to the end of art, we should, I think, also talk of end of religion. To avoid some misunderstanding, however, the thesis of the end of religion does not mean that there is no religion in modern society, or that only those who are left behind can still believe. And I think that in this respect, a comparison with the end of art can prove helpful again. The thesis of the end of art does not imply that there are no more works of art in the modern world, or that no modern man can devote his life to art anymore, and sometimes even with tremendous social recognition and financial success. No, this is not what the thesis of the end of the art means. The thesis merely states that art no longer constitutes the privileged form of public discourse. That for the modern public, it no longer has the power of persuasion that it once had for the Greeks. Or as Hegel says, though we may still admire the great works of art, our knee no longer bends before them. So the art is dead in that sense. And I think that the same applies to religion. Of course, people may continue to be deeply religious personally, and of course, there may still be many who, regarding the question of the origin of the world, for instance, or of creation of the intelligent life or life in general, may acknowledge the authority of the Bible rather than the authority of physics or biology. But this is not the point. This is a private question. The point is that in the modern world, religion no longer constitutes the privileged form of consciousness that the absolute spirit has of itself. The political decisions of a modern state can, in principle, in fact, it may happen otherwise, but in principle, the political decisions of a modern state can no longer be justified by divine inspiration or by the judgment of high priests. And if they are, as sometimes they are, as was the case in the decision of George W. Bush to invade Iraq, who said that he listened to the word of God, this is considered peculiar, strange, and ultimately unacceptable, because public decision in a modern state cannot be justified with religious reasons. In this sense, we can speak of the death of the end of religion and of the beginning of science. This is the counterpart. Such a development of the absolute spirit is naturally reflected in the corresponding development of the objective spirit, that is, finally, of the state. If the ancient state was beautiful and the medieval state was pious, the modern state is rational, or one might say scientific. Accordingly, Hegel treated scientists as servants of modern state and assigned them, together with other workers of the universal, such as teachers and the entire public sector, to the universal estate, the allgemeiner Stand, which distinguishes itself, among the other things, by the provision in Hegel that it does not send representatives to the legislative assembly. And what at first may appear as an exclusion from political life is justified on the ground that, as workers of the universal, scientists are from the very beginning involved in the political decision-making process. In other words, the reason is that, according to Hegel, science, and philosophy in particular, is inherently political. So there is no need. They do their political, we do our political job. We are involved in political process by being scientists, by practicing science. The privileged position of science does not mean, however, that state power falls within the exclusive competence of experts. According to Hegel, the modern order of knowledge includes the moment of subjectivity, at least in two respects. Knowledge is subjective, first, in that what a subject is, and the people is a political subject, cannot be determined without taking into account its position, its thinking. In this sense, one cannot speak of the objective interest of the people as if this could be something given or imposed from the outside. And second, knowledge is subjective for Hegel also in the sense that at a certain moment it requires a gesture of subjective recognition, a gesture that each subject is ultimately bound to make on their own. As in Protestantism, and Hegel's theory of science can in this sense be regarded as a secularized form of Protestantism. As in Protestantism, there are no laymen in the modern epistemic regime. So we are all priests of this new form of absolute spirit. In no higher or lesser degree, scientists, the professional scientists, are therefore high priests of this new religion. Be that as it may, because of this double subjectivity of knowledge, Hegel devoted particular attention to public opinion, to which he, and this is, I think, again remarkable, even ascribed a special structural place within the legislative power. Under the rubric, under the heading of legislative power, Hegel treats, among other things, the phenomenon of public opinion as a part of the legislative power. In Hegel's view, public opinion is one of the most difficult phenomena to grasp. It is, as he says, vox Dei and nulla vox. Vox Dei and nulla vox at the same time. And it deserves both respect and contempt at the same time. On the one hand, public opinion is a manifestation of the knowledge that the political subject has of herself, and it must be therefore considered in all political decisions. Vox Dei in this sense. On the other hand, however, it is just an opinion, that is, knowledge as appearance, according to Hegel, as appearance in which the essential and the unessential, the true and the untrue, are immediately intermixed. And the great political task of the modern state is therefore to transform the public opinion into public knowledge. That could be, let's say, the program of Hegelian politics, to transform political opinion into public knowledge. Yet this task is difficult, or more difficult because, according to Hegel, there is precisely no gradual transition from opinion to rational knowledge. The transformation in question can only be produced in the mode of rupture. Hegel speaks here of Unterbrechung. So how to do this transformation? One could say that the entire system of political mediation that makes for the constitution of Hegel's state, along with its atypical three-parted division of power, is designed to transform fragments of public opinion, also the true within the public opinion, into a system of public knowledge. In a sense, Hegel's state is nothing but a huge mechanism, or let us say organism, continuously producing public knowledge. The state for Hegel exists in the world, however, and the system of political mediation may therefore fail to grasp what constitutes the substantial basis of public opinion. According to Hegel, this is the time for strong personalities, for political leaders who can feel the pulse of the people and have the courage to realize what they need. One can, however, yes, that is Hegel's position. There are situations when this is needed. One can, however, observe that in the modern state, the emergence of strong personality is always, as it is today, a manifestation of the failure of the system of political mediation, which was obviously unable to sublate public opinion into public knowledge. So, because this transformation of public opinion into public knowledge wasn't successful, obviously, it is because of this failure that a space, an opportunity for strong political personalities to other mode of transformation may open. Okay, I hope this brief outline has helped to clarify in what sense I think Hegel's state is an epistemic institution. Such a close relation to knowledge should hardly come as a surprise if one considers that the individual can only realize her freedom by inscribing herself in the realm of reason, and that for Hegel, the state is the place where individual can lead a universal life. Es ist Bestimmung der Individuen, ein allgemeines Leben zu führen. Und wo? Im Staat. It has to be added, however, that this close relation also implies that the other way around also holds. That is, that modern state has certain epistemic conditions, if it is an epistemic institution. One can safely say that according to Hegel, the modern state vitally and crucially depends on the social hegemony of a certain form of knowledge, namely the one that more or less corresponds to Hegel's philosophy. And the problem is, or Hegel's structure of knowledge, Hegelian form of knowledge, Hegelian reason. The problem is that this form of knowledge has recently lost its social self-evidence, to say it mildly. Here I would just like to point to two relatively fresh major ruptures: the end of grand narratives and the algorithmic production of knowledge. One is tempted to say the atomization and automation of knowledge. As Lyotard pointed out, in the postmodern age, reason ceased being the last instance that once unified all regional knowledge systems into a single grand narrative. Instead, a multitude of regional knowledge systems emerged, which each with its own internal structure and characteristic mode of legitimation. The change brought about a profound shift in the status of knowledge, Lyotard observes. The very form and status of knowledge has been transformed by this phenomenon. Because reason, at least as we knew it, this reason is a jealous God. If citing universal reasons is but one of the valid modes of justification, rational knowledge has lost its status as knowledge, because reason is sovereign in its self-interpretation. This is something the autonomy in Kant is all about. And if reason is not self-legislating anymore, if it is not the only source of the valid norms, then the regime of knowledge has been replaced by some other regime of knowing, let's say, the regime of opinion. That would be one point, and since it is well accepted, I will not dwell on it any further. Let me just add that with the plurality of opinions, the problem of their social coordinations emerges. So, if we have rational knowledge, we know how coordinate, at least in principle, divergent positions. But if any opinion, if we are not within the regime of rational knowledge, but with the regime of plurality of particular opinions, we still have the problem how to coordinate between them, how to, let's say, provisionally unify them, how to produce a collective decision, for instance. And this problem was, in accordance with the very form of opinion, has generally come to be solved in two major ways in our societies. The first is the mode of market exchange, and the second is in relation to the level of insistence of the subject holding a particular opinion, meaning the more a subject is convinced of his being right, the more his opinion, his conviction is validated. And since normally, usually, the religious conviction are supposed to be highly engaged, the most highly engaging, we all, according to this logic, accept or validate particularly religious opinion. But this is only the consequence of the fact that we have lost the other ways of coordination between subjects holding different views or different opinions in general. And as far as this is concerned, I think that the rise of neoliberalism that promoted market weight of the opinion exchange and the new obscurantism that favors this kind of subjective insistence on particular positions go, in fact, hand in hand. There are two different sides of the same phenomenon, I would say. But as I said, I will leave this aspect aside. This is just to mention it. The end of grand narratives was already in Lyotard, the postmodern condition, associated with the technological changes in the treatment of information. Technological development, however, which has enabled an enormous increase in the amount of data collected and the capacity to process them, has only recently led to machines increasingly taking over access to knowledge and even the production of knowledge. And this would be now the other point. This change too has profound implications for the status of knowledge. We have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to know when almost all the possible information is but a mouse click away? What implication does it have for the status of what to know means? What does it mean to decide, to accept, to make a decision in an environment where, based on comprehensive analysis of our previous decisions, ranging from the social networks to online shopping and the places we happened to visit, we are offered a recommendation that should perfectly meet our needs about we have never heard before. We didn't even know that before that we had them. And what does it mean to think at a time when higher intellectual operations such as, let's say, facial recognition, which is a complicated thing, chess playing, which is less complicated, translating, text writing, etc., are increasingly performed by machines, by algorithms. This is, let's say, what does it mean? What these changes in the structure, in the mode the knowledge is being produced and functions, what are the implications of these changes for the status and form of the knowledge in our modern society? Since this area is extremely broad and challenging, at least for me, I will restrict myself to a few short remarks. The great advantage of digital processes is that they can now run extremely fast and operate with almost endless amounts of input. Since they are therefore not forced to filter the data according to preconceived criteria, they can identify patterns that are completely counterintuitive. We wouldn't have expected this correlation exists. We wouldn't have searched for it, but a computer, stupid as it is, can detect it. In this respect, mechanical knowledge production embodies the epistemology once advocated by logical atomism, I think. You know, we start with completely uninterpreted set of data, and then, based on this, construct our interpretation of the world. And I think that at certain point, Foucault too, in his Archéologie de Savoir, held a similar epistemology. In other words, in automated knowledge production, the process starts with a completely abstract aggregation of data and typically results in an equally abstract, non-interpreted pattern. Similarly, when one seeks an answer using a search engine, and the result is the same, what we get? We get a sequence of hits ranged in linear mode. The entire process can run smoothly beyond the field of meaning, or in Hegelian terms, it works in the realm of correctness, not of the truth. Let us take here a closer look. When our search yields a series of hits, or when we are offered products that we should shop for online, we do not know, and often, and this is more important, we cannot know. We don't have any way of knowing according to which criteria the algorithm proposed exactly those items in that precise order. This arrangement cannot be subjected to any critical evaluation, and its correctness cannot be questioned at all. And what we get in this way is a kind of knowledge that strictly forbids any criticism, because we don't know how it was produced in the first place. Moreover, in today's process of automated knowledge production, algorithms are often complex to such a degree that even those who originally designed them no longer know how a certain result was generated, and consequently whether the procedure was carried out correctly. For instance, today mathematical science is increasingly conducted, developed by data processing, by programs which have run wild. The mathematicians themselves don't know anymore whether the argument, whether a proof was conducted in a correct way. They assume it, of course, but you know, as a person can make a mistake, so a computer can too, or the one that wrote the program can make a mistake. But they, for instance, they're at least those who wrote the original algorithm, the original program that yielded this result. But when we use the system of knowledge production, don't have this access to the, let's say, the inner working of those algorithms. The result stands there in its bare positivity, as a fact that one can only acknowledge or not, but in principle it stands there as a knowledge that cannot know itself. And this is, I think, epistemically significant. We have a knowledge that does not know itself, a knowledge that does not know its reasons, on which basis it was produced. But precisely because we do not know what the selection criteria are, it is, let us assume, not impossible, In fact, it is quite possible, quite so, that the criteria in question are adapted according to the interests of the provider of the algorithm. The problem is that when using such tools and within such modes of knowledge, we are exposed to power effects that are beyond our judgment and beyond our control. We can only use it. We can use the knowledge, but we don't know it anymore. We are not in a position to reproduce it anymore. More than that, since both the data thus obtained and the algorithm for such knowledge production are owned by private companies, we know, Google, Facebook, Amazon, we are confronted with a multi-layered privatization of widely, if not publicly, used knowledge. And this too, I think, has its epistemic and political consequences. The automation phenomenon in question helps us, I believe, to identify an important aspect of the structural change in public knowledge that has taken place in recent years. Precisely because now because facts are now typically provided in a conceptually abstract and bare form, and not, as in principle before, embedded in a network of reasons, they are, for instance, these facts, all the more suitable for post-factual treatment, a treatment which does not so much rely on a simple negation or falsification, but rather on the proliferation of alternative facts. And precisely because digital knowledge is basically knowledge that does not know itself, it is all the more susceptible to arbitrary interpretations and power manipulations. If the bits of this knowledge are torn out of the space of reason, one knowledge precisely counts just as much as any other. All different, all equal. This is the new motto. What is definitely missing here is the public formation of rational knowledge. Okay. We had started with saying that Hegelian concept of the state has its epistemic conditions. This means that the important structural change in the regime of knowledge that occurred with the postmodern age must have produced important repercussions in the really existent state as well. The change in the regime of knowledge must have political implications. But I think that that these connections goes also in the opposite direction, meaning that the existing political system itself produces, or at least reinforces, a certain image of knowledge, a certain structure of knowledge. What we call the regime of opinion can to this effect be seen as a structural side effect of liberal democracy. So it is a liberal democracy that produces or gives social affirmation, social reinforcement of a certain structure of knowledge. Why? How does this system function? Since political representatives are chosen by the so-called system of free, universal, secret elections, in which what happens? Abstract individuals compete for abstract votes from abstract voters. Since this is so, the connection between the social body and the political state is cut, is severed. Political life, as Hegel observed already, hangs in the air. It's separated from its social basis. Moreover, not only are political representatives selected only on the quantity of votes, which is often without any obvious relation to the quality of their programs, but the electoral process itself takes place outside the regime of knowledge. Let us depict ourselves how the voting takes place. The votes are cast in secrecy. So nobody is supposed to justify his or her vote. The votes are cast in secrecy, in isolation. The voters are physically transformed in atomized individual. And this individual has no duty to justify her decision. She can treat her vote exactly as she can treat her property, which, as we know, on traditional doctrine, she is at liberty to freely use, enjoy, and abuse. A voter, in this sense, it is its property, it's its opinion. She or he can do with that whatever she wants. And interestingly enough, she can even sell it. Why not? Because it's her vote at the end. She's not obliged to justify it. She does it so because she has the right, she has the freedom to do it. And this is, the voter has the same relation to his vote as a proprietor has to its property, according to the doctrine of abstract right in Hegel. And this is the implementation of the abstract right relation. And this too has epistemic implications. So the change in the system of knowledge has political implications. But also the changes in political systems have their epistemic consequences. Because state and knowledge and science are mutually correlated. This would be the thesis. Now, if this is the problem, what would be the solution? How a socialist government would look like? Well, okay, let us. So we said that, okay, the relation between the state and knowledge is bidirectional. It runs in both directions. If this is so, then equal efforts must be made on both sides, on the system of knowledge and on the political system. As far as the structure of knowledge is concerned, I believe that after the flood of small narratives and the spread of the discourses of suspicion, it is perhaps necessary to find the courage to stand up again for the great, grand narratives and to emphasize the emancipatory effects of knowing. This does not mean that we should simply forget the criticism warning us against the limits of reason. Here too, a simple return to the old business as usual is no longer possible. But it has probably now become clearer that with all the power effects that rational knowledge brings along, reason is still, yes, it has certain power effects, yes. However, reason is still the only realm where the subject can realize her freedom. And this is why we cannot forsake the realm of reason. It is my contention that Hegel turns out to be extremely topical in this respect, precisely in this respect. Why? Because he once already found himself in a structurally similar position, having to defend the cause of the universal, the cause of reason, against the particularistic attacks of Romanticism. I mean, I think that the situation is similar. Perhaps it is too much to claim that the production of scientific knowledge must again be regarded as a public service located within the state. Or perhaps it might not, I don't know. But in any case, I think it is imperative that the machine-like production of knowledge be made public, both in terms of public access to algorithms that render epistemic products and in terms of public access to processes and databases that are now owned by private owners, private companies. Let us say that the automatic production of knowledge must become public too. Anything entering the realm of public reason must be public, if it is to count as knowledge. And as it does, since it does, it has to be let's say we could speak of nationalization of company databases and algorithms. This could be, let's say, a feasible political program, not the nationalization of woods and houses and lands, but privatization, nationalization of databases and algorithms publicly used. As far as the state is concerned, on the other side, I would like to point out that in his philosophy of right, Hegel developed a model of the formation of political will that was conceived as a complex system of mediation in which social interests were not represented, but indeed presented, nicht vorgestellt oder repräsentiert, sondern dargestellt. In a Hegelian state, the legislative assembly does not stand for society. It does repräsentiert sie nicht. It is society. It is society in miniature, which in turn is only possible because the entirety of political life is understood as a system of mediation according to the model of the production of public knowledge. This goes hand in hand. For a long time, Hegel's theory of political representation was, I think, not taken seriously, at least not seriously enough. This neglect had a number of reasons, from accusation of Hegel's political conformism. We know the servant of a Prussian state that Hegel allegedly was, to la haine de l'État, hatred of the state, which was common both to the left and to the right. And this is one of the most common feature of modern subject. And endly, to the widespread belief that liberal democracy, with its regime of political parties and general election, is ultimately the least bad of all bad political systems. This was the view attributed to, I think, Churchill. Yes, it's awful, it's democracy is the worst, but it's still the best. There's no better system available. But since this belief too, I believe, has lost its empirical basis, I don't think that there is anyone who would be able to repeat Churchill's dictum, because on all levels, and it can be traced also in political participation in general elections, that it rapidly dropping down in all segments. So this thesis, it may be witty, but it does not seem convincing anymore, I would say. It has lost its self-evidency, its empirical basis. And since this is so, I think that it's probably the time to take Hegel seriously in this respect as well. And though it may sound a little strange, I believe that our Yugoslav experience, to say it again, that is the theory of pluralism of self-governing or self-managing interests, may prove helpful here. One must remember that Kardel, I brought a book with me, Smeri razvoja političnega sistema socialističnega samoupravljanja, the directions of development of political system of socialist self-management. This is the book. That in this book, in fact, I read it, and I was, okay, it's a long book, it could have been written more densely, definitely, but it's not so obviously flawed. It has some points. And in my view, Kardel made on two important points repeated actually Hegel's gesture in two key respects. Although Kardel recognized the difference between bourgeois civil society and the state, in his model he strived for a direct inclusion of social structures in political mediation. he envisaged, let us say, unidirectionally porous relation, so to speak. So, okay, civil society is shadowed from the politics, but civil society transpires, leaks through the realm of political state. This is one thing. So, in a sense, he, in a similar way as Honneth, emphasized the importance of a social division of labor. We definitely had that. This is one thing. And second, he explicitly understood the political decision-making process, including the mediation of conflicts, because, you know, if we have a pluralism of socialist self-managed interests, we have the conflicts between these interests. And he explicitly understood the political decision-making with the mediation of conflicts according to the model that otherwise applies to the field of knowledge and culture. This was in a similar mode as a conflict are solved in the mode of knowledge, in the mode of science, in the field of science. So, to end, I suggest, in short, that we think the state as an institution of knowledge, that we affirm the role of knowledge within the state, but also place it under the guide of public reason, and that we make politics rational and reason political, as it is in Hegel and I think also in Honneth, although he on several occasions explicitly declared his allegiance to liberalism, to my dismay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.